Welcome, guys. Tonight we slip into a candlelit town where bread ovens breathe warm clouds. Bells herd the daylight like patient sheep, and you edge through a market lane that smells of apples, leather, damp wool, and possibility. You're not rushing. Dating in this world rarely does. You pass baskets of onions, a stall of ribbons that pretend to be sensible, and a bench where old men argue about weather as if it were politics, which it is. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from far away or next door, tell me your city and the time on your clock. It's strangely soothing to watch our sleepy map light up. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the square at mid-morning, when gossip is fresh and bread still crackles. First meetings here aren't apps and swipes, they're glances and errands. You pretend to examine pairs, while your eyes examine a person examining pairs, a very meta kind of produce appraisal. Their sleeve is tidy, their laugh is soft, their coins jingle like a discreet thesis on solvency. A baker's boy shouts about loaves, which makes the moment feel less cinematic, but that's the charm. Romance has to elbow its way past chores. Mini thesis line. In medieval towns, dating begins as ordinary life conducted slowly within watchful sightlines. You don't sprint toward love. You share a stall, then a smile, then a conversation that hides inside the price of cheese. The church door across the square yawns like a polite invitation. You drift that way because markets supply eyes and churches supply intermissions. In the nave's quiet, you kneel 2 pews apart, not because it's strategic, but because God enjoys a buffer zone. The light from stained glass paints your sleeve a little red, a little blue. You decide the colors make you look trustworthy, which is exactly the sort of thought you're supposed to confess. During the hymn, your voices braid without trying. During the homily, your attention wanders exactly at the same line. You both cough into your sleeves, which counts as compatibility in 3 parishes. Mainstream historical fact. For most townsfolk, church services and feast day processions are the most acceptable public spaces for cross-family mingling, and many couples trace first meaningful contact to shared pews, guild benches, or saint day gatherings. You don't call it flirting, you call it piety with decent acoustics. You exit to find the square reassembled into its usual theater. Chickens negotiate crosswalks. A dog studies theology by staring at sausage. A ribbon seller drapes a strip of faded red over your wrist and sings its virtues like a bard, auditioning for your sleeve. You catch the other person smiling at the performance, and for a heartbeat, you are allies in the ancient sport of not overpaying for string. You return the ribbon, then paradoxically buy it, because sometimes a tiny extravagance is a memory receipt. Curious tidbit. Some towns carry a quiet habit where a ribbon color whispers intention, blue for hope, green for patience, red for courage in certain dances, nothing official. Just enough overlap that old women nod knowingly when they see a particular knot. You tie your ribbon to the handle of your basket because your courage is better at hinting than boasting. You stage your next encounter with the subtlety of a cat pretending to read. You angle by the well when the bell for sext is near, not because you're thirsty, but because everyone is. The bucket squeaks. The water smells like stone and weather. You offer the ladle first, which is both manners and a clever way to make talking optional. The conversation that does happen stays humble. Flour prices, the baker's new apprentice who burns crust but smiles well, the goose that achieved local fame by eschewing fences. Joke 1, you say, deadpan, I only come to the well for the gossip. And the old woman beside you nods gravely and says, as does the water. You are now in a triangle with a well and a legend. A bell rings from the church tower, a tidy reminder that daylight has chapters. Curfews at night and bells by day regulate movement in ways modern romance would call inconvenient and medieval romance calls acceptable suspense. You plan future proximity like a siege patient, well supplied, and with great respect for walls. Walls here means chaperones, neighbors, and the fact that every window doubles as a witness. Historians still argue whether markets were genuinely permissive spaces for courting or merely tolerated crossroads under communal surveillance. Either way, you feel seen and somehow safer for it. There's comfort in being observed when the whole point is to behave. At a cheese stall, you learn the art of how to linger without becoming furniture. You purchase a modest wedge, then ask about weather prospects like a general disguised as a meteorologist. Th. A stallholder, who has attended more romances than a troubadour, offers the other person a slice for tasting. And suddenly, you are both chewing the same category of hope. You don't touch hands, you don't need to. The sample accomplishes the same spiritual paperwork as a handshake. Joke 2. You assess the cheese seriously and pronounce, complex, with notes of bovine. The stallholder cackles. Your almost conversation partner smiles with their eyes. You feel 12% braver. Later, a messenger from nothing in particular hustles by and reminds you that errands exist, which is both rude and helpful. You are not supposed to look like you're loitering for an emotion. You invent a task, wax for the candles you definitely own, thread for the hem you'll surely finish, a sprig of rosemary for the pot, which might be a metaphor. You fold the ribbon into your basket and vow to pass the same way after none. This is not a date yet, but it is the kind of practice that persuades fate to pay attention. As afternoon thins, you take the longer street home because it passes the carpenter's shop, where your almost conversation partner's cousin sometimes stands, which statistically raises the chance of accidentally being seen by the person you're hoping to see. And yes, that sentence is a labyrinth on purpose. The cousin isn't there. Instead, you find a boy carving a spoon like he's negotiating with wood. You buy the spoon for a little too much because generosity amounts to advertising in a town this size. The boy will repeat that you were kind. Kindness spreads like butter in a warm room and has similar culinary applications in gossip. You reach your door with nothing to declare except produce, thread, a spoon that hopes to be a family heirloom, and the most medieval tool of romance, patience. Dating in this world is less sparkler and more ember. You tend small heat where everyone can see the smoke without calling the watch. Mini thesis line, reinforced. Courtship begins in shared errands and shared silences, and progress is measured in how ordinary things become slightly shared on purpose. At dusk, you slip to the church again, because Compline is a lullaby and also a second chance. The nave smells like beeswax and stone cooled by centuries. People file in with the same choreography of hushed cloth. You settle near a pillar that believes in you. Your almost conversation partner arrives on the other side of the aisle with their family, which you receive as both encouragement and community guideline. During a psalm, you both find the same line, the one about mercy pursuing you, and your eyes lift at the same time. Compatibility confirmed by scripture is a niche metric, but you are nothing if not thorough. mainstream historical fact, tucked gently into the pew. Feast day calendars and weekly services structure social time, and many towns use these rhythms to give young people recurring, respectable venues to notice each other under the eyes of kin. Choir practices, guild meetings, and processions multiply this effect. You inhale the wax, the dust, the breathable quiet, and realize these are the corridors where feelings learn how to walk without bumping into furniture. After Compline, the square feels gentled, torches bloom like cautious flowers. You don't walk together, you walk near, which is the accepted prelude to later agreed upon nearness. A neighbor calls a good night that means I saw you, which is both surveillance and blessing. Joke 3. You whisper to yourself, this is the medieval version of changing your status to it's complicated with bread. The night pretends not to laugh. Back home, the door latch clicks into its usual sentence. You set your things on the table, cheese, spoon, ribbon, thread, and imagine you're laying out a map for the next week. The ribbon says courage, the spoon says kindness, the thread says continuation, the cheese says dinner, which is a form of romance not discussed enough in ballads. You make a modest meal and think about how many tiny choices go into a single safe glance. Dating here is craft, not spectacle. You lie on your pallet listening to the neighborhood finish its day. A cart rolls late. Someone laughs 2 houses away. A cat holds parliament under the moon. You picture the same sounds pouring into the other household and feel the strange comfort of parallel lives that might, with enough patience and properly timed errands, begin to braid. Historians still argue whether most marriages in towns were matches of affection or calculation. You suspect the answer is yes. And that affection grows fastest where calculation behaves itself. Morning will ask you to pretend you aren't planning. You will. You will also leave the ribbon in view, because subtlety is lovely, but so is a readable signal, and old women can't nod knowingly if you hide your props. And when you pass the cheese stall, you will thank the stallholder with exaggerated gravity as if you're acknowledging. NG a diplomatic envoy, because in a very real way you are. As you drift, one last thought threads the day together. This is dating as a town project. The square provides sightlines, the church provides rhythm, the stalls provide excuses, the bells provide pacing, the neighbors provide memory. You bring only a face, a ribbon, a joke about bovines, and the willingness to show up twice. That is enough to get the door of possibility to unlatch a thumb's width. You step into the lane early, because timing here is choreography, and everyone knows the steps even if they pretend they're inventing them. The bell for prime has said its piece. Shop shutters lift like eyelids. You adjust your ribbon where it can be noticed, without being accused of showing off. You're not alone in this art. A cousin stationed, casually, at a doorway is a lighthouse for your reputation. A neighbor sweeping is a human footnote that reads, all proper. You navigate chaperones, curfews, and street rules the way a fish navigates water, mostly invisible until you swim the wrong direction and a net appears. Mini thesis line. In town life, courting unfolds within a social stage where kin, neighbors, guilds, and bells function as both guardrails and guides. A chaperone isn't always a dragon. Sometimes she's a tired ant with an embroidery hoop and a generous policy on benign silence. She accompanies you to the spice stall with the air of a woman who knows exactly how much cinnamon a love story needs. You aim for a route that passes the workshop you care about, call it destiny via urban planning, and she permits it because she remembers being you. Mainstream historical fact. In many towns, unmarried women are expected to appear in public with kin, servants, or companions, especially when conversations with unrelated men seem possible. And guild or parish norms often reinforce that pairing. The result isn't an iron chain. It's a visible communal permission slip that says, "We are watching," which is how we protect. Curfew is the night side of the same idea. The watch will cry the hour and remind you to cover fire and come to bed, which is both domestic advice and social policy. You are free to moon about during daylight, but after the bell of Complin, anything that looks like romance should shrink to an ember. Historians still argue whether curfews served primarily as fire prevention, crime control, or moral boundary. Since all three benefit, either way, courting after dark means doorways, thresholds, and windows, with neighbors as the chorus. You'd be amazed how well a whisper travels up timber. Your aunt has errands of her own. There's a rumor she buys ribbon for altar decorations, which might be true in a cosmic sense. So she parks herself on a bench near the well. Her presence turns the square into a polite salon. You move among stalls with acceptable freedom, knowing any conversation will be graded and noted with the kindness that comes from living next door forever. The person you hope to see materializes with enviable punctuality, accompanied by a sister who takes chaperoning as theater and underplays it beautifully by examining onions with interpretive seriousness. You nod to both. You address the chaperone first. You let your sentence include the other person only as the third ingredient, onions. Whether you, because hierarchy is the oil that keeps gossip from squealing. A street rule kicks in. Don't stand so long you become a landmark. You stroll, keeping 3 modest paces between you and anything like privacy. Joke 1. You murmur to your aunt as you pass, "We are walking separately together, as civilization requires." And she, without looking up, replies, "And civilization thanks you for your service." Her needle continues on its pilgrimage. You continue on yours. At the edge of the square, a guild beadle is chalking notices about meeting times and fines. Guilds are the town's other chaperones. They decide when a journeyman can afford marriage, which means they also decide when courting shifts from possibility to plan. A friend whispers that the person you like is close to master, and your heart applies to the treasury for permission to feel optimistic. Mainstream historical fact. Guild membership and status often govern marriage timing for artisans. A journeyman without the means to maintain a household can be discouraged from formal engagement, while a new master's shop is practically a wedding invitation with tools attached. The result is that romance keeps the guild calendar in its pocket. You pass a side lane where youths play at quarterstaff with brooms, watched by a neighbor who has sworn never to miss a scandal. The rules here are unofficial but known. No lingering in alleys, no leaning in doorways you don't own, no accidental hand brushes that could become psalm fodder by vespers. You obey with relief. Boundaries are easier to keep when the fence is painted in bright communal paint. Historians still argue whether these customs were more restrictive in cities than in villages. Town records suggest enforcement scales with population density, while village lanes trade strictness for omniscience. Everything is seen anyway. A curious tidbit. Some places keep watching benches near gates where matrons volunteer for the civic hobby of romance quality control. They sit with rosaries and hawk eyes, and if a couple walks by too many times in 1 hour, a cough happens, and the cough means, vary your route or vary your intentions. You adjust your orbit accordingly. You would never want to disappoint a cough. The day's most delicate move is the escorted walk, half promenade, half negotiation. Your aunt rises. The other person's sister tidies her basket strap like a tiny trumpet. The pairs align as if the street were ruled for margins. Chaperones outside, hopefuls inside, elbows occasionally sharing the same climate. You talk about matters that can be said twice, no secrets, only seasons, bread, guild fairs, and saints' days. The point isn't information, it's cadence. Can this person handle silence without panicking? Can they laugh without scaring birds? When you pass the church, you all cross yourselves because God is watching, and also because the gesture buys you 2 seconds of facial reconfiguration if you've been smiling too much. You reach the tannery, which is smell and industry braided into the shape of unpleasant honesty, and all parties instinctively turn, because romance thrives on many things but tannins are not one of them. Joke 2. You say lightly, I always hoped love would smell less like boiled hide, and the sister laughs, breaking her onion critic persona to reveal she has human friendship settings. Now you know 3 people can be comfortable in one smell, which is the medieval metric for compatibility. Curfew creeps in earlier during winter, encouraging afternoon decisiveness. If you are going to propose a future conversation, it must be now, in daylight, where witnesses can admire your restraint. You float an idea, market day after the next holy day, near the ribbon stall that pretends not to be complicit. The sister considers your aunt. Your aunt practices the ancient art of seeming to think deeply about the sky. Consent settles with the weight of a feather on a scale. Plans are not dates. They are permissions to try for a date in a week. Mini thesis reinforced. Chaperones and curfews don't kill romance. They sculpt it into manageable shapes the town can bless. As sunset tips the roofs, the watch begins its warm-up rounds. Candles blink awake behind shutters. Wood smoke locates your memories. You escort your aunt home with the grandeur of a knight returning from a polite quest, which in effect you are, minus the dragon and plus the onion. At the door, you perform the ritual of recounting all conversation in an amusing but non-self-incriminating way. She approves your timing, your topic choices, and your avoidance of alleys. The onion receives honorable mention. Later, you sit by the small fire with a cup of watered wine and consider how much public choreography it takes to arrange a private hope. The bell will call curfew soon. You think of thresholds, the miniature stages where a lot of romance happens inside the law. Standing in a doorway while a relative hovers in the next room is the medieval version of a porch swing with stricter weather. Mainstream historical fact. Threshold courtship is common. Doorway conversations under watchful lamp or candle give couples a controlled setting to speak, with family nearby to satisfy propriety and safety. You imagine the other household, their doorway, their chaperone with her onion resumes, and feel strange kinship with architecture. The bell sings curfew, and the town replies by pulling its breath into smaller shapes. You bank the coals and bank your face into calm. The watch wanders by with a lantern and a line about take heed to fire and light, which doubles as advice for your heart. Historians still argue whether watchmen were protectors of virtue or simply collectors of fines. From your window, they look like both with a side hustle in weather commentary. You nod as if they can see through walls. You blow the lamp out. You stay awake anyway, because feelings do not recognize municipal lighting policies. Morning arrives with its inventory. You did not break any rules. You arranged the next careful contact. Your aunt is on your side. The watch did not knock. The tannery is still tragic. You go to the guild hall to deliver a message for someone else, because errands keep you from chewing your own ribbon. On the way, you pass a small knot of women debating whose daughter walked where and with whom yesterday. It sounds like a courtroom, and a knitting circle had a musical baby. You greet them politely and do not pause, which is the correct move when you are a topic and do not wish to become a guest speaker. A curious tidbit whispers along the arcade. In certain towns, there's an informal bell of courtesy, a known hour when it's decent to end visits, and anyone overstaying invites jokes the next day. You keep that phantom bell in mind. Nothing is more romantic than leaving 3 minutes before the town decides it's time. It lets memories do the work, so you don't have to. At midday, you practice the overlooked half of courting etiquette, being busy. You do your tasks with persuasive vigor, because nothing cools interest like idleness in a culture that reads industry as moral hygiene. You mend the hem you lied about and feel morally refreshed. The cat observes your productivity and blesses it by sitting on the cloth at key intervals. Joke 3, you tell the cat, "You're my chaperone for stitching." And the cat says, MRR, which in feline canon law means, and for all things. Evening brings another escorted walk, shorter, because the watch is in a mood. Your aunt detours to admire a window box with the nonchalance of a professional decoy. The sister matches her stride. You and hopeful you swap the next safe sentence. It is small, and it is enough. You agree on the precise section of market to occupy next week, because clarity prevents accidental scandal with someone else who also likes onions. Historians still argue whether these systems evolved grassroots from communal instincts or were shaped top-down by clerical pressure. The lived experience from where you stand is that people prefer their rules to look like courtesy rather than command. You can do courtesy. You're getting good at it. When the door closes behind you again, the house exhales. You place the onion in a bowl, which frankly is a little on the nose as symbolism goes. You smile anyway. You think of how curfews tuck the town in, how chaperones turn lanes into well-lit halls, how street customs let you be brave without turning the square into theater. Mini-thesis, final. The social scaffolding isn't the enemy of love. It's the joist that holds the balcony where you get to stand and wave at it. You learn quickly that feelings in this town prefer to be wrapped like bread, plain cloth on the outside, warmth inside, so you begin to practice fluent subtlety. The square is the post office, the shop front is the stationery, and your hands are the secret ink. A token left, a riddle spoken, a folded note escorted by the most reliable courier in Europe, a grandmother with nothing to prove. Mini-thesis line. In medieval courting, small objects and playful words carry heavy meanings, so reputations can remain light. It starts with a spindle whorl. Not a diamond, not even silver, just a smooth little disc of fired clay, etched with a pattern that looks like wind learning to write. You buy it from a traveling potter who claims the design prevents tangles and bad dreams. You raise an eyebrow at the upsell, then buy it anyway because a story adds value. The whorl is practical, which is also romantic in a town where thread is destiny. You tuck it in a linen pouch with a sprig of rosemary and a ribbon fragment. The ribbon, yes, the one that pretends not to be obvious. You don't hand it over like a proclamation. You ask the sister chaperone if she might pass along a small thing that wants work, which makes the token sound like an apprentice applying for a job. She smiles like a person who knows a good hire. Mainstream historical fact: tokens of courtship in towns often took the form of useful goods: spindle whorls, gloves, pins, belts, knives, embroidered bands, because display without function could look like vanity, while function with grace looked like competence and care. Gifts weren't always expensive. They were steady. You're not attempting to bankrupt yourself into attractiveness. You're trying to join the household's rhythm before you're invited to the door. Next comes the message that isn't a message: riddles passed at the stall where apples gossip about seasons. You test the waters with light wordplay, partly because jokes are free, partly because riddles allow plausible deniability. What turns and never leaves its place? You ask, fingering a potter's wheel that has never heard of subtlety. The answer is obvious. The implication is. The reply comes later, said with a grin. What travels the town without lifting its feet? You glance at the bell tower and surrender the point. You both admire how these questions let the market overhear, only whether while you smuggle meaning in the grammar. A curious tidbit: in some parishes, couples trade carved breads, tiny rolls scored with symbols during fairs. The baker swears each cut means something, like knots in a ribbon. A double cross might honor a saint, a spiral might mean remember, a cluster might say patience. Whether the vocabulary exists or the baker is a poet with dough on his hands, the ritual is charming. You commission 2 small loaves with a single spiral each, and yes, you know that's the sort of aggressive symbolism that makes old women squint. You hand one to the sister for the table, then place the other at your own hearth so your fire can learn the same word. Historians still argue whether such edible codes were widespread language or just localized fun. The delight is real even if the dictionary is. Notes when they happen: dress plainly. No perfumed paper. That belongs to courts and troubadours with more loot than sense. Yours is a small square of decent linen rag, folded into a square that looks like a patient square, sealed not with wax, too official, but with a stitch of thread you can pull open without breaking anything. You write with a hand that tries not to show off, because legible is flirtatious enough in a world where many letters live in other people's mouths. Your words are careful. A compliment for the family's bread, true. A mention of the spindle whorl, seeking a lively future, cute. A gentle hope for the fair next week, practical. And precisely nothing that would horrify a parish clerk doing an audit. You send it via your aunt, who tucks it behind a Psalter page with the air of a professional smuggler. She is now the CEO of logistics and grace. Responses sometimes prefer to be objects instead of ink. The next morning, a glove appears on your windowsill, sun-warmed, palms stitched with neat attention. It's not brand new. It's better, a glove with work in it, the sort of thing that says, "I understand mornings." Inside the cuff, a single green thread has been woven like a vein. You don't need a legend. The thread says patience in a dialect your ribbon understands. You flex your fingers into the glove and laugh quietly at your own hand, looking suddenly more prepared for life. Mainstream historical fact: gloves and sleeves had long associations with favors. In tournaments, they decorated helmets, and in towns, they migrated into gentler symbolism: permission to visit, acknowledgement of kindness, or simple warmth on purpose. Your glove is none of the martial nonsense. It is tenderness disguised as leather. it also fits, which tells you someone either guessed well or bribed your aunt for measurements, which feels like either romance or conspiracy, both of which are acceptable genres. Play keeps pace with work, riddles grow a little braver, tokens a little more personal. On a feast day, you trade lines by a maypole you are both too dignified to dance around, and yet not dignified enough to ignore. What holds without hands, you ask? A promise, comes the answer, and the sister coughs into her onion sleeve with suspicious timing. What burns without flame, they ask. Embarrassment, you reply, because sometimes truth is funnier than poetry. The square approves. Laughter travels like pigeons do, everywhere at once with great authority. You risk a slightly more direct note, slipped through the acceptable channel of family. The fair on St. Mildred's, might I keep near you during the dance, with your sister and my aunt close by to critique our footwork. It is the medieval equivalent of requesting a square dance with an audience and a judging panel, which is exactly how towns keep things decent. The reply, stitched in that same green thread onto a corner of linen, simply says, yes, with small corrections. You are not entirely sure whether the corrections apply to dancing or character. You accept both. A curious tidbit. A few towns maintain a question tree, a literal tree in the square where folks pin folded questions on market eaves, work requests, lost property notices, prayers for rain, and yes, occasionally a veiled courtship prompt written like a practical matter. Who will trade a blue ribbon for one green in hope of patience? The note might read, and someone will answer beneath, bring bread. Whether it begins as barter and ends as banter depends on weather and witnesses. You try it once with a decoy question, seeking a plain spoon, offering a good joke, and wind up with a decent spoon and a better joke. Not everything aims at romance. Cultivating a public tone of generosity is itself a signal. You keep a ledger of what not to write. You don't promise futures before guild approvals. You don't hint at secrets you can't keep while someone is always in earshot. You don't write anything that would look ugly framed in the town hall after someone misplaces it. You choose a vocabulary of bread, bells, ribbons, patience, errands, and weather. A sturdy lexicon that can survive a surprise reading by a suspicious aunt. It's a narrow lane, but your sentences learn to walk it with better shoes. Mainstream historical fact. Parish priests announce bans publicly for 3 consecutive holy days before marriage to invite objections. Even before bans, many couples test the waters with promises, handfasts, and betrothal tokens that may or may not carry legal weight depending on time and place. Your notes deliberately avoid legal phrasing. You're circling with courtesy until the guild ledger smiles. Historians still argue whether informal vows, given with tokens before witnesses, could bind couples in the eyes of law or merely of conscience. Case records read like poetry written by lawyers. You prefer to keep your poetry edible and your law patient. Now the dance of middle distance begins. Letters shrink, tokens specialize. You try a small brooch carved like a sprig of wheat, pinned to the inside of a sleeve where only a conspirator would notice. In return, a ribbon arrives, dyed a shade your aunt calls safer than red and braver than blue. She ties it at your basket, S-handle herself, which makes the gift communal, which is exactly the point. Romance that the town can see is romance the town can protect. The sister, emerging as the household's poet laureate of onion-based commentary, starts to pass verbal puzzles with recipes attached. What herb forgives a too salty stew? She asks, and answers her own riddle with a fistful of parsley. What herb forgives a too salty rumor? You counter, handing over mint. Both work better than denial. Joke one of this stretch. You quip to your aunt, if we keep trading herbs like this, we'll accidentally invent salad. She replies, as long as you don't invent scandal. Point taken. A small crisis tests your system. A note goes missing, not yours, mercifully, and the square buzzes like a hive with an opinion. You and your allied household respond by turning down the volume, tokens pause, talking rises, riddles go public and wholesome, like what has a mouth and never eats? A river, yes. You demonstrate to the town that your romance can pass an audit. The missing note eventually surfaces in a dog's mouth, which is both hilarious and philosophically appropriate. Historians still argue whether dog-related evidence should be admissible. You decide to thank the hound with a scrap of cheese diplomacy. Feast day arrives, and with it your small plan dancing in circles while chaperones orbit like moons. Before the music starts, you exchange the quietest tokens yet. You, a small folded thread. Book with 2 needles slotted through. They, a clean kerchief with your initial stitched, so tiny only the intimately nosy could identify it. These are the sorts of objects that households appreciate. They live long, get used, and absorb stories like good wood absorbs oil. Mainstream historical fact: many surviving lovers' tokens are textile, bands, belts, kerchiefs, and needlebooks, precisely because cloth needed care and care made stories visible. You stand ready for the dance. The caller's voice turns instructions into a lullaby. Hands, step, turn, release. Your palms meet in the cleanest geometry allowed by the century. The sister pretends to critique foot placements with the focus of a cathedral architect. Your aunt collects data at the edge with eyes that used to be yours. For the space of a song, your tokens feel redundant. Your feet, which usually negotiate bread and mud, learn to negotiate timing and another person at once. When the song ends, you separate with theatrical correctness and actual reluctance, which is the precise posture the town wants to see. Joke 2. Into the hush you say, we executed 12 legal turns and 1 accidental flourish. And from 2 directions, you receive 2 synchronized coughs that translate to, we noticed. The riddles, afterward, taste sweeter. You sit on opposite ends of a bench like people auditioning for a fresco. What runs, rests, and returns? You ask. A week, comes the answer, and your heart agrees to wait. The sister, breaking formation, offers an onion tart with the air of a judge awarding a prize for good behavior. Your aunt hums in a key that sounds like approval. You take tiny bites so the moment lasts. A curious tidbit. Some guilds teach apprentices a code of knots on laces. The way a bow sits can indicate working, at church, or not today. Whether lovers borrowed the code is debated in exactly 3 taverns and 1 embroidery circle. You amuse yourself by retying your ribbon in a way you claim means careful optimism. The sister notices, squints, and repositions at 15 degrees, which you assume translates to even more careful. You accept her edit. You asked for a copy editor when you entered this story. Tokens grow a shade braver when they cross seasons. On a colder morning, a mug of hot ale with rosemary arrives at your door from nobody in particular. You know exactly which nobody plotted it, and exactly which sister delivered the weather report. You send back a small pot of plum preserves labeled for patience on bread, which is both literal and liturgical. Mainstream fact, folded in gently. Gift exchanges often pivot around liturgical seasons and markets, Advent fairs, Candlemas candles, Easter breads, allowing coded generosity under the umbrella of communal giving. Your ledger notes an uptick in culinary metaphors. Your aunt notes an uptick in satisfied sighs. Historians still argue whether these love token systems were primarily urban or whether villages used similar subtlety with fewer props. The best answer is that intimacy adapts to density. The busier the square, the fancier the code. In a hamlet, one flower does the job. In a town, you need a ribbon, a glove, a loaf, a riddle, a sister, an aunt, and an alibi. As night falls, you lay out the day's quiet trophies. The thread book, the kerchief, the glove, the crumbs of a tart. They lived in echo of 12 legal turns. You read your own life like a marginal note beside a psalm, small, steady, and happier for not shouting. Mini-thesis, final. Tokens and wordplay let feelings grow visible without becoming scandal, transforming errands into sentences and objects into promises you can hold. The fair arrives with flags that look like laundry having ideas, and the air tastes like cinnamon, wood smoke, and impulse decisions. Stalls bloom where goats recently had opinions. You thread through it all with your ribbon doing its best posture, and your aunt doing her best impression of a person, only coincidentally walking in the same direction as romance. This is the sanctioned playground, fairs, feasts, and dancing circles, where proximity gets a temporary license, and the whole town plays lifeguard. Mini-thesis line. Holiday spaces loosen the laces of daily life, just enough for careful nearness to turn into real promise. Morning begins with a procession that looks like the square dressed up as itself. Children carry candles too seriously. A guild banner with a fish on it swims regally in the wind. The bell discovers new ways to be festive. You fall in beside your aunt, near the herb women, conveniently close to the household you hope to spend the afternoon around. The sister catches your eye, lifts one onion in a gesture that, in your shared dialect, means behave, thrive. Mainstream historical fact. Feast days and fairs are among the most common times for courting pairs to talk, walk, and most importantly dance in public. Because communal celebration provides supervision, cover, and opportunity. Tie all at once. It isn't secrecy, it's supervised freedom, which is either an oxymoron or a decent definition of love. A booth offers riddle cakes, which are thin pancakes with words pricked into them before frying. You and hopeful you buy one that asks, what is shared and never spent? And take turns pretending not to know it's time, because pretending is foreplay for patience. Nearby, a cup and ball juggler performs sincerity with a hat that should have written permission. The jester calls, choose a prize for someone who deserves it, and without thinking you point at a small wooden brooch carved like a star. It is nothing, it is everything. It is a way to say, I saw you, without recruiting witnesses with clipboards. You hand it to the sister to pin for you. She does, smiling like a locksmith who enjoys good work. The dance green fills with circles, as if geometry decided to go on a picnic. The caller, a woman with lungs that could launch a ship, teaches 3 figures. Hand in hand round, weaving lines, and a final kiss the wind turn that means air only. Thank you. Lips reserved for later decades of paperwork. You pair as arranged, chaperones outer orbit, hopefuls inner, and the music starts. A drum that knows how to be polite, a pipe that remembers how to be joyful, a rebec whose strings forgive feet. Your hand meets theirs in that neat, brief press that feels like a legal handshake and an old secret at the same time. You step, you turn, you release on command, and for 2 long songs, your bodies memorize each other at the distance the parish approves. It is astonishing how much can be said with exactly the allowed amount of touch. Curious tidbit: some regions play a game called Apple Bob Promise, where daring souls fish apples from a tub with their teeth, and whoever gets the marked apple owes a song to the person they admire. It's half aquatic sport, half extrovert trap. You are not reckless, but you are theatrical when the prize is singing badly for a worthy cause. You dunk, emerge victorious and dripping like a well-behaved river spirit, and dedicate a short, respectable refrain to steadfast companions on saintly days. Everyone knows who you mean. No one can prosecute you for it. The laughter dries you faster than the towel. Feast tables stretch like hopeful thoughts. You take your place among guild friends and suspicious pies. The bread is good, the stew is honest, the pears are trying their best. You orchestrate seat choices with a finesse that would shame diplomats, your aunt left, the sister right, hopeful you across where glances travel without customs duty. Conversation plays its own music. Guild news, harvest guesses, the joke about the cooper who tried to marry a barrel and changed his mind because the hoops were too tight. Joke one, you add, at least the dowry was well staved. And earn an onion sleeve snort plus 3 pity laughs, which is the medieval Michelin star. After dinner comes the pretext portion of the afternoon. Games. You pretend to be deeply invested in quoits while actually inventing a 2-person sport called We Watch Each Other Pretend to Watch Quoits. Your aunt approves because your concentration face looks like virtue. Meanwhile, an old woman with a basket of colored cords offers fortune knots, a harmless plate for good luck in work and love. The sister buys one in green, ties it to your sleeve, and says, "For patience, naturally." You reply, "Naturally," and hope the cord has the decency to work overtime. Mainstream historical fact: public games and dances, especially during Mayings, rogation processions, and saints' feasts, were accepted venues for youthful mingling, and records of church courts sometimes fuss about excessive mirth, while tolerating the normal amount as if joy were a rationed commodity. You remain on the lawful side of mirth, except for one burst when a sheep escapes its decorative garland, and an entire circle of dancers breaks formation to become a sheep rescue league. The animal is recovered. The garland is repurposed into a festive evidence wreath. Music again, this time a circle where partners change with each phrase, meaning you stand opposite hopeful you, then beside, then 2 down, then briefly separated by a blacksmith who dances like a friendly anvil. It's excellent practice for marriage, this steady swapping and returning. You are handed a set of rosemary sprigs for a figure that requires passing them in a chain. You breathe the scent, clean, herbal, memorizing, and when the figure ends, 1 sprig remains in your hand. Later, tucked unnoticed into your glove, it feels like a library card for a future evening. You slip away to the periphery where craft stalls hum. A carver sells spoon blanks and saints on sticks. A painter sells small holy faces on oak that smell like oil and patience. You don't buy a saint for love, that seems like hubris, but you note which saint your almost person lingers near. Mildred again. Not a surprise, Patey. NT, practical, kind to travelers. You buy a small pin with a geometric pattern that looks like intertwined paths and tell yourself it's just pretty. It sits neatly on the ribbon, which appreciates good company. Curious tidbit: a few fairs in your region maintain a lover's ledger, overseen by matrons, where hopeful pairs can enter names side by side as a very soft public intention. No law, just a community bookmark. The sister suggests, in a tone that could mean anything from buy onions to propose. That such a ledger exists by the cider tent. Your aunt pretends not to hear and accidentally remembers a chore in that exact direction. You approach, both rehearsing your handwriting for the least dramatic act of bravery you have ever attempted. The ledger is simple: names, day, a column titled Witness, where your aunt and the sister supply their signatures with practiced serenity. You write, they write. The cider tent pretends to be scenery. The square will know by vespers, and because you did it where matrons hunt for scandal with nets, the news will arrive wrapped in blessing. Historians still argue whether such ledgers were anywhere common, or merely a local quirk with wide storytelling footprints. Whether widespread or not, community witnessed intention is as medieval as bells. The sun leans toward late, throwing long shadows like fresh carpets. You walk a permitted loop around the green side by side, chaperones in echo, trading the sort of sentences that could live on a church wall without blushing. You mention needing new candle stubs before winter. They mention a guild test coming. Your aunt asks about flour, which is code for how will you feed joy. The sister asks about patience, which is code for everything. You all pass the question tree. Someone has pinned a card that reads, "Seeking whether that minds its manners," signed everyone. You nod. Appropriate. Mainstream historical fact. Many European regions posted bans well in advance of any ceremony. But before bans came talk, between families, within guilds, across tables. Fairs often served as neutral ground for these early negotiations, because everyone was already dressed for compromise. You feel the first tug of that rope, affection wrapped in logistics, hope tied to work, laughter stapled to bread. It is not less romantic for being practical. In this world, practicality is foreplay. The evening dance is gentler, paced like a psalm that knows where to land. The kiss the wind figure returns, and this time, when you lift your face to the approved air, the breeze actually shows up and touches your cheek with a chill that feels like a signature. The sister sees your expression, and for once, does not cough. Your aunt sighs in the key of "We will need more candles," which is a happily married sound. Joke 2. As the music ends, you whisper to hopeful you, "We achieved 7 legal proximities today and registered once with cider." And they reply, "Add 1 for the sheep," which you concede is fair. The ledger has done its subtle work. Later, onion commentary will turn into practical talks, numbers, rooms, dowry things that are less poetry and more scaffolding. But tonight you are allowed to go home with a head full of circles and a sleeve full of rosemary. A child runs by with a twist of paper containing sugar almonds, luxury disguised as pebbles. They trip near you, sweets scatter like ideas. You and hopeful you gather them quickly, returning candied thoughts to small hands. 1 almond remains, warm from running. You split it because generosity tastes stupider if you hoard it, and also because sharing sugar feels like skipping 10 pages in a troubadour's manual without the loot. You lick the dust from your thumb and decide this is exactly the level of scandal you're equipped to handle. Curfew will come, kinder on feast nights, but punctual anyway. You escort your aunt toward home. The sister does the mirroring. Hopeful you matches your stride as if your feet had made friends independent of faces. At the fork, you exchange the smallest promise, mark it after prime ribbon stall region, plus a look that says you both know the town will already have scheduled it for you. You separate as correctly as saints on separate panels, each turning toward a house that will smell of smoke, onion, and talk. Historians still argue whether fairs were more facilitator or filter. You decide they are both. They let the right yesies grow, and the wrong ones trip over sheep. Back inside, you lay the rosemary sprig on the table beside the star brooch, the riddle cake wrapper, the green cord knot, and yes, another onion because you have branded your love story and must commit. You sit with the day until the fire bends low, letting your breath slow to the dance's old rhythm. Step, turn, release, return. Mini thesis, final. Festivals may be temporary, but the permission they offer is real. Room to practice togetherness in public, so private hope can be trusted later at home. Me. You wake to the square wearing its weekday face again. Banners away. Sheep regarlanded as ordinary sheep, and the baker back to arguing with yeast like an old married couple. The fair gave you momentum. Now the ledger asks for math. Love in a town like this breathes better when it pays its rent on time. Guilds, dowries, and matchmaking math start humming behind the soft music you've been dancing to. And you listen because the future has a budget, even when the heart wants poetry. Mini thesis line. In medieval town courting, affection advances when work, coin, and kin agreements say it can. You're at the Guildhall before prime, which impresses nobody and everyone at once. The building smells like wood, iron, ink, and meetings that could have been shorter even in Latin. Masters arrive with keys that sound like authority. Journeymen arrive with faces that hope to be trusted. Apprentices arrive with brooms because sweeping is the entry-level job for dreams. Mainstream historical fact. Urban craft guilds regulate training, wages, shop ownership, and often marriage timing, discouraging or delaying weddings until a journeyman can keep a household, and in some cities, until he attains the freedom of the craft as a master. You sit in the balcony with other citizens whose futures are being negotiated downstairs. It's like watching weather form from inside a cloud. The beadle recites fines with the relish of a man who loves nouns. Shavings left in the lane, dishonest measure in a cord of wood, scandalous singing during work. The rebec player blushes. Then, the matter you care about, the calendar for master tests, and who's close to submitting a masterwork. Your maybe person's name appears in a tidy list under by Michaelmas. Your breath runs the length of the nave and back. This is the arithmetic of courtship. Dates plus dues plus the confidence of elders. Historians still argue whether guild restrictions were mainly economic protectionism or moral guidance packaged as practicality. From your seat, they feel like both, sewn together with thread that holds if you don't yank. After the meeting, you practice the second half of the equation, family talk, by visiting your aunt's oldest friend, who is nobody's fool and everyone's proof that adulthood can be deeply competent. She keeps a ledger the way saints keep prayers, and she explains dowry not like a fee for love, but like an investment in a household's first winter. Bread, bedding, a small chest, a pot big enough to mean soup for neighbors, a linen stash with dignity, and sometimes coin, sometimes not. Dowry is not a bribe, she says, cutting cheese like it owes her an apology. It is a cushion. You're not buying a husband, you're buying time to figure out how to be married without starving. You nod and write cushion in your private glossary of sanity. Curious tidbit. Some parishes maintain dowry boxes, communal funds or guild-sponsored chests that lend small sums to respectable couples with more affection than coin, repaid over seasons like a friendly debt to the town. The box has a saint painted on it, which is both branding and reminder. Whether your town has one depends on the generosity of 4 women and a candle maker. You make a note to ask discreetly, which means asking the candle maker, because he floats in every conversation like a waxy diplomat. The matchmaking art begins with a sentence that looks like a shopping list and is actually a poem. Who knows a good family? Your aunt poses it in the bakery queue. 2 names bob to the surface, both respectable, one eager. The sister hears via onion post and arranges what we'll politely call bread adjacency. Both households agree to buy loaves within the same hour for the next few days. This allows conversations to occur at the speed of ovens. Mainstream historical fact. While formal matchmakers existed more prominently in some Jewish and Mediterranean communities, in many European towns, matchmaking was an informal craft performed by aunts, godparents, and guild elders who traded reputations like currency. No crystal balls, just memory and prudent optimism. You stack your assets on the table that night like a still life of intention. 1 decent chest with functioning hinges, a reasonable store of linen, a cooking pot that has feelings about stew, 2 good spoons, very symbolic, and a pouch with coins that are not impressive but are honest. You sketch a budget with your aunt, rent or co-residence, bread costs, candle math, flour in winter, ale that is medicinal but not performative. Joke 1, you announce with the gravity of a scribe, we can afford love on weekdays and porridge on Sundays. And your aunt replies, reverse that, which is why economists keep aunts. Your maybe person conducts a parallel audit across town. You know this because the sister gives you a look in the square that translates to, we counted spoons too. You appreciate the symmetry. The 2 households then perform the ancient rite of mutual visiting with extra sweeping. You host first. The table is scrubbed with vinegar until it has opinions, the rushes are fresh enough to flirt, and the cat is forcibly exiled and then readmits himself because cats are canonically unbannable. You talk work and weather, and what saint you'd like to lean on for a shop sign someday. You suggest Mildred for practical kindness. They suggest Joseph for quiet competence. Nothing is promised. Everything is auditioned. Your aunt produces the good cheese, like a closing argument. Mainstream historical fact. Betrothals could be arranged in 2 broad ways, family and community brokering with consent, or more private agreements between the pair, later ratified. In towns, the former often dominates because neighbors function as both archives and witnesses. Hand gifts and earnests sometimes accompany promises, coins split, rings given, or, for practical romantics, tools exchanged. Historians still argue whether a spoken betrothal with witnesses created a binding contract in all places. The precise legal weight shifts across regions and centuries. Your strategy: speak carefully, witness abundantly, and keep the cat from swearing anyone in by walking on the table. Dowry conversations are less drama and more spreadsheet. What do you bring? What can they house? Will you live over the shop or with kin until rents behave? Is there an uncle with a room that wants laughter? You aim for plain answers. A chest, linens, a pot, a promise to keep accounts without turning the marriage into a tax office. The other family offers tools, a corner for your chest, and the information that a neighbor is relocating after harvest, which might open a small room with a window that believes in dawn. A window that believes in dawn is heavier than silver in your calculations. Curious tidbit: some towns celebrate a broom standing, where a new household receives a broom from neighbors during setup. Sweeping together, Once is supposed to shoo out misfortune and dust arguments. You would like a broom standing more than a parade. You imagine sweeping in tandem, laughing when the cat misinterprets the ceremony as a challenge, and you decide to casually float the idea as if you hadn't already named the broom in your head. The guild re-enters by the front door. An elder from the craft invites your aunt and you to a drink in the hall's side room. There, with a jug that tastes like good decisions, he outlines the practical timeline, test by Michaelmas, evaluation by the Feast of St. Luke. Shop space likely available if Master H retires his planes as rumored, and a small guild loan for the first month's materials. Provided his accounts look like, he knows the difference between profit and bragging. You assure the elder that bragging will be outsourced to onions. He does not laugh, which is how you know he likes you. Guild humor is a very dry wine. Mainstream historical fact. Guild loans, apprenticeships rolled into family alliances, and tenancy over shops were normal instruments that made marriages economically possible. Dowry could flow in goods, not just coin, bedding, cloth, even a stake in a workbench. The goal wasn't luxury, it was viability. You find viability deeply attractive. Romance looks excellent in candlelight, but it spends most of its day counting thread. A small snag appears, as snags do. Rumor thinks it saw your maybe person talk too long to a weaver's niece at the fair. The rumor is bored and wants to be interesting. Your aunt, veteran of 3 rumor wars, proposes the corrective. Invite the weaver's household to supper as witnesses to your ordinary decency. You do. They come. Everyone is charming in that tense, careful way. The niece brings a pie and a visible lack of designs on anyone. The rumor dies of natural causes and pastry envy. Historians still argue whether communities policed reputation harshly or helpfully. Tonight it feels like both aimed at mercy. You finalize the earnest exchange on a market morning in full view of the square, because transparency is the town's preferred perfume. You give a belt you embroidered, sturdy leather, tidy stitching, initials hidden inside the fold like a joke, only the 2 of you will ever find. They give a work knife with a handle smoothed by someone else's honest labor, and now yours to add to. The sister and your aunt nod like magistrates approving a festival. The belt and knife are not rings, but they ring anyway inside your chest. Joke 2, you say to the sister, "We are now bound by belt and sliced by knife. Surely that's either auspicious or a recipe." And she answers, "It's stew, keep stirring." Your aunt adopts the line immediately, proving good phrases spread faster than butter on warm bread. Now the paperwork of souls begins to hover. Handfasts, banns, and which priest has the calmer homilies. You don't step into the church office yet. You wait for guild business to take its breath, because starting banns only to pause them invites more onion commentary than you can eat. The plan sets like cooling wax. Guild test by Michaelmas, dowry list finalized by All Saints, bans in Advent if the calendar and the elder consent, wedding after Candlemas when days lengthen and bread feels more optimistic. It's a calendar that smells like sense. Curious tidbit. Some couples mark the transition from courting to betrothal by exchanging shoes, actually swapping or touching them in a little pantomime of "we will walk the road together." Whether it's widespread or a single family's broad joke, you like it. Outside the Guildhall steps, you and hopeful you, flanked by aunt and sister, tap shoes like brief birds on a rail. Nobody else notices. You do. That's enough. You spend the next week practicing the married art of errands. You compare prices on salt with the zeal of saints, debate candles like philosophers, pick a broom that feels like a partner, not a scold. The cat approves the broom by attacking it, which is appropriate. Your aunt teaches you the long math of flower and feast days, how to ensure the month ends with dignity and not an argument with barley. You test your future with tasks. Can we make stew together without fencing with spoons? Can we plan for a leak we don't have yet? Can we laugh when the cat's tail signs the ledger? Mainstream historical fact. Households were economic units first, romances second only in hours tallied, not in importance. Workshops upstairs, beds behind curtains, kitchens that double as boardrooms. Marrying without a plan is a luxury nobody advertises. You feel the plan taking breath. Historians still argue whether affection or arrangement presided over most urban marriages. You live in the overlap where arrangement plays bass, and affection takes melody, and the song slaps, as the jongleur definitely does not say. The elder posts the master test date. Your stomach posts butterflies. You assemble a small cheering section that looks exactly like everyday customers, and is, in fact, everyday customers briefed to nod with conviction. Your maybe person works, not for romance but for work, which is the romance, and produces a piece that turns elders into men who remember their first try and decide to be kind. The vote goes your way, with one old crank performing his theater of reluctance to feel relevant. He is outvoted and comforted with ale. The hall acknowledges competence with the medieval equivalent of a like button, a grunt and a ledger entry. Joke 3, you tell your aunt, "We are now officially permitted to worry about other things." And she answers, "Excellent. I've prepared a list," which includes candles, neighbors, and how to keep joy from spilling on the floor. You look at the list and feel nothing but relief. Lists are love letters written to the future in bullet points. That night, the two households meet with a candle maker, told you to inquire discreetly about the dowry box and candles for banns you haven't posted yet. He suggests beeswax for the ceremony and tallow for life, which is a sermon if you squint. He also offers a small discount if you promise to return the stubs for remelting. "We keep the light going," he says, and suddenly you want him to give the homily instead of the priest. You leave with bundles that smell like answers and a feeling like the town just shifted subtly to make space for the shape of you two. Mini thesis, final. Affection may have started your story, but work, tools, and shared arithmetic are what move it forward without tripping. The festival was the melody. Today you learn the harmony that lets the song last. You stand at the edge of a threshold that already knows your name, and you feel the town lean in, not to pry, just to witness. Whispered promises want daylight. Private hopes want paperwork. Affection wants a choir. Handfasts, bans, and church law unfurl like a modest banner that says, in old letters and new breath, "We mean it." Mini thesis line. Moving from courting to commitment means translating feelings into forms, spoken vows, public bans, and rules that frame intention so communities can protect it. Your first stop is not the priest, it's the kitchen table, because even promises need bread under them. Your aunt lays out the sensible stack, the belt and knife you exchanged, the small ledger with dowry items, a short list of witnesses who can be counted on to remember accurately, and 2 candles, 1 beeswax, 1 tallow, because symbolism is a budget category. She also adds a sprig of rosemary, which has followed this story like a well-behaved dog. For memory, she says. Mainstream historical fact. Before formal bans, many couples performed some version of a handfast, a spoken promise exchanged, sometimes with clasped hands, sometimes with token gifts, often before witnesses, its legal force varying widely by region and century. If you make such a promise, you do it where ears can testify and where words won't blow away. You don't want drama, you want clar. Idy, so you choose a small, bright place. The guild side room, doors open to the hall, with the elder and the candle maker and your respective chaperones seated like gentle judges. You stand facing each other with palms ready, and the elder, who moonlights as a liturgical metronome, nods once. Your hands meet, not like a clutch, not like an accident, just a warm hinge where two intentions join. You say plain things on purpose. I, with God's help, and my craft and my kin, promise to keep to you toward marriage, if our church and our town agree it should be so. The reply matches your rhythm. No poetry that will embarrass future you, no legalese that will confuse any aunt. Curious tidbit, some handfasts used knotted ribbons literally binding wrists, a theatrical flourish beloved by painters and patient grandmothers. Others relied purely on clasped hands and a coin split between you. Your town prefers the grip and the witnesses. You keep ribbons for sleeves. Historians still argue whether a handfast alone was enough to form a valid marriage, consent of the parties being a cornerstone in some legal traditions, versus requiring a church ceremony for full recognition. The reality sprawls: local custom, canon developments, civil courts, and who shows up to object all change the answer. Your plan is simple. Let the handfast be promise. Let the church make it public. Let the wedding seal it with bread and candles. The priest's office smells like ink, dried rushes, and pastoral concerns. He is kinder than his sermons and fussier than his shoes, a combination that works out to fair. He asks the questions priests ask when souls and reputations are involved. Are you free? Are you of age according to both law and common sense? Are your kin consenting without knives? Is the craft satisfied? Have you already promised anyone else anything that will send us all to the bishop for the rest of our lives? You answer in the negative where negatives help, and the positive where yes belongs. Mainstream historical fact. Canon law requires publication of bans, typically 3 successive holy days, announcing your intent so the community can raise legal impediments, consanguinity, prior vows, etc. It's the church's version of Speak Now, spread out over 3 patient Sundays. You pick a Sunday that tastes like fresh air. The first of Advent, because waiting is already the theme. The priest copies names carefully into the book, the parchment equivalent of chiseling stone. He practices the announcement once as if he's reading a recipe. Names, intent, request for obstacles to present themselves before they embarrass anyone later. The candle maker, who absolutely did not tag along for gossip, just happens to be there and offers to trim wicks for the band's days, which is how commerce becomes liturgy, and nobody complains. The first Sunday arrives, and with it the kind of nerves that ought to be taxed. You sit 2 pews apart in the arrangement now traditional in your households, the aunt's aisle, the sister's aisle, the impossible aisle between that is now possible. The priest reaches the bands and reads your names aloud, pronouncing them like a prayer that found its shoes. The church listens the way stone does, with immense attention that doesn't blink. There's a small rustle from the back where the rumor enjoys its sport, then silence, which is consent's older cousin. Joke 1. You breathe out and think, well, that's one Sunday of not being canceled, and your aunt gives you a look that translates to behave and be grateful. Between readings, you submit to the medieval FAQ, a process the town enjoys more than bread. People ask with frank curiosity if you will live over the shop, probably. Whether the dowry chest has decent hinges, yes. Whether you will name your future broom, perhaps. And whether you will invite old crank master to the wedding despite his vote drama. We are saints in training. Yes. You answer all with good humor because goodwill is the best guard for a name. Mainstream historical fact. Objections at bans could be serious. A claim of kin too close, a prior promise to another, a vow made in panic years ago. Communities knew the stakes. The system was messy, but designed to catch the big rocks before the cart breaks an axle. Second Sunday, the bell sounds less like a test and more like habit. The names roll again, nobody points. Even the roomer admits boredom and focuses on the new altar cloth, which, frankly, deserves the attention. The priest, with pastoral flair, folds a little homily around the reading about promises being public not to shame love, but to protect it. He drops his voice on protect, which makes 3 old men cough meaningfully. Historians still argue whether bans slowed spontaneous, love-drunk marriages, or simply turned spontaneity into a 3-week picnic. Either way, the pace offers space for hearts to be sure and neighbors to be helpful. Curious tidbit, some couples exchange church pennies during. Bans, a small coin given to the poor, or dropped into the alms box each Sunday of announcement, dedicating the promise to mercy as well as logistics. You and hopeful you do this quietly. The candle maker notices because candle makers notice everything, and he upgrades your wick, trimming out of sheer theology. Third Sunday, you arrive with the calm that comes when a river has worn a path. The reading lands like a stone that chooses to sit rather than sink. No objections, only the soft collective satisfaction of a town that has watched you do this thing correctly. The priest smiles without showing teeth, which is his way of hugging. Mainstream historical fact. After 3 readings with no impediment, couples could proceed to a church wedding. Many did so quickly. Others waited for seasons, markets, or the finishing of a chest or a dress. Your schedule looks like Candlemas, for light, and because winter's shoulders begin to loosen then. Now church law turns practical decisions into choreography. You meet with the priest to settle details. The time after High Mass, when people will already be caught. The witnesses, elders, aunts, the onion sister in a dignified seat, the offerings, bread, wine, candle, and the small donation that keeps roofs from arguing with rain. He asks about confession, gently steering you toward clean consciences not because scandal lurks, but because clean cupboards are nicer to cook in. You nod. You are not offended. You like when rituals align with domestic sanity. Handfast memory still warms your wrist like a ghost, ribbon as you choose the wedding band's prototype. Perhaps a narrow loop you can work in without bruising a finger, or perhaps none at all if tools and gloves make rings hazardous. Historians still argue how common rings were across classes in certain centuries. It varies by place and purse. You care more about a belt and a knife and a broom. You keep whatever symbolism fits under flour and wax. Between banns and wedding, the town settles into a benevolent watch. The guild elder checks in with the air of a father who insists he is not your father. The baker slides an extra loaf onto your table by mistake. The weaver's niece, now a friend weaponized against rumor, offers to help hem something quietly heroic. The candle maker confirms your beeswax order and, unable to resist, reminds you to bring back stubs so light can learn reincarnation. Joke 2, you tell the priest during a planning meeting, "We aim for a very boring wedding." And he replies, without missing a beat, "Holiness is frequently mistaken for boredom," which is the sort of line you plan to embroider on a towel no one will use. You revisit your handfast place, guild side room, door ajar, and thank the elder for letting that promise live safely. He pretends not to be touched, fails, and presents you with a small, sensible gift, a ledger of good paper and a pencil of lead sharpened to a most ecclesiastically approved point. "For peace between numbers," he says, "it is the most romantic thing anyone has given you that isn't edible or rosemary." Curious tidbit: in some corners, couples mark the end of banns with a shared fast day followed by a shared feast. The fast not for punishment, but for making room. The feast not for indulgence, but for gratitude. You decide to adopt the first half. You keep a simple meal, choose quiet over chatter, and talk softly at your doorway with chaperones within polite earshot. You do not transcend the earth. You do, however, notice that breath feels longer when food is simpler, and that listening increases when chewing decreases. You end the evening with warm milk and the kind of smile that makes thresholds approve. The wedding approaches with the stealth of dawn. You arrange your beeswax, you borrow a cloth, you ask 3 neighbors to please bring their laughter in clean condition. The priest rehearses his part. You rehearse yours. The joining of hands, the word "I will," the pace of breath that will prevent you from saying it too loudly. Mainstream historical fact: many medieval weddings took place at the church door, public, visible, and then often moved inside for mass and blessings, turning thresholds into sacraments. You like thresholds, they've been your classroom. Historians still argue about the exact boundaries of consent makes marriage versus ceremony makes marriage across centuries and jurisdictions. You choose both, consent in your clasped hands and ceremony in your clasped community. You sleep the last night of banns like someone whose house has all the shutters latched, but none of the windows closed, letting moonlight do what it does best. Remind you that softness is also structure. On the morning that will belong to Section 10, you light the beeswax the candle maker trimmed with theology, and you watch the flame decide to be steady. Mini thesis, final. Promises become durable when they are said where witnesses can hear and laws can hold, not to cage love, but to key. Ep wind from blowing it out. The way cupped hands make a shelter around a flame you intend to carry home. You keep your promises tidy, but patience has edges, and sometimes you find yourself tracing them like a map you could walk in your sleep. With bands behind you and Candlemas waiting like a kind doorway, you do what everyone does in the quiet between steps. You lean on little hopes. Love charms, saint days, and folk rituals gather around the edges of your practical plan, not as shortcuts, but as company. Mini thesis line. Harmless folk practices, knotted ribbons, timely prayers, edible omens. Give patience a job to do while the real work of partnership unfolds. The town knows the difference between superstition that bites and superstition that smiles. You reach for the smiling kind. On a washing day, you take a slender green ribbon, remember the sister's favorite shade, and you tie a simple knot into it while whispering a sentence you would gladly say out loud if the cat insisted. keep us steady. You tuck the ribbon into your thread book, not to command the future, but to remind your hands of their vote. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval people across Europe mixed faith with folkways. Saints, feast days, protective charms, and household rituals lived alongside church practice, often tolerated when they stayed gentle and local. Your ribbon knot feels more like a lullaby than a spell. A curious tidbit: in one nearby parish, bakers make patience loaves on the eve of St. Agnes, small rolls pricked with 3 dots. You eat one before sleep and hope to dream of your future. The town's older women will swear the custom works, if you deserve it, which is the sort of clause that doubles as theology and quality control. You try it for the story, mostly. The roll is slightly sweet, the dream is mostly about sweeping, and you wake up pleased anyway, because sweeping with someone else still counts as romance. Your calendar, already friendly with saints, starts to feel like a conversation. Candlemas is coming, wax and blessing, and the promise that winter is not the only season in charge. You light a small taper at dusk for 3 nights, not because the taper performs miracles, but because it trains twilight to expect gentleness. You say a short prayer for work, for roofs, for temperate tongues and bread that doesn't burn when the day does. Historians still argue whether clergy frowned or smiled at these home rituals. In most places, a frown melted into a wink when the practice stayed close to charity and did not challenge the priest's job of keeping consciences from making each other sick. Meanwhile, the sister becomes your resident folklorist, shepherding a flock of traditions with onion authority. She produces a scrap of linen with a tiny sprig embroidered in one corner, rosemary, naturally, and tells you to keep it under your pillow, so dreams don't forget their chores. You comply, partly because you're superstitious, mostly because embroidery is a love language. Your aunt, not to be outdone by any lore involving pillows, offers an older charm. Slip a clean coin beneath the doorstep on the last Sunday before the wedding, so that coin becomes the first to welcome others. Coins and thresholds enjoy this kind of metaphor and behave better when you include them. Mainstream historical fact. Pilgrims of the age sometimes brought back badges from shrines, thin metal tokens stamped with a saint's sign, as portable prayers and proof of travel. These tokens circulated through households where they were pinned to hats, bags, or bed curtains for blessing and bragging in equal measure. You don't have time to walk to Canterbury or Compostela, but you do have a friend back from a local shrine who gifts you a tiny pewter scallop. You hide it near the hearth where its meaning can warm in private. The priest would approve. The cat is suspicious, but ultimately respectful. You and hopeful you, still practicing the indoor sport of talking on thresholds with chaperones within polite earshot, trade low-stakes rituals as if you are comparing regional cooking techniques. They admit they tie their shoe laces with a double loop on days when tests arrive. So courage has something to hold. You confess that you stir porridge clockwise, so breakfast knows where to go. Joke 1. The sister chimes in that she salts the rumor mill by telling it boring things first, which might actually be magic given its demonstrated effectiveness. Wind, which has its own calendar, starts to bring longer afternoons. On one such afternoon, you and your aunt take a walk that accidentally passes a hawthorn outside the gate, because folk logic likes hawthorn for beginnings that mind their manners. You do not pick it, it's not May, and you are not a headline. but you do touch the bark with 2 fingers and say a sentence about roots holding, which is more therapy than magic, but lands softly in the heart. Historians still argue whether tree customs were druidic residue, agricultural courtesy, or human beings doing what human beings do. Talking to things that outlive the M as practice for talking to God. A market stall sells small wax tablets for writing and erasing and writing again, and you buy one, not because you need more lists you do, but because erasing and trying again seems like a ritual you want on your table. You practice the names you will say at the church door, then smooth them away and write candles, onions, mint, because marriage is not only names, and neither is dinner. You also draw the world's worst broom as a reminder to finally buy one with bristles that pull their weight. The cat sits directly on the broom drawing and declares it handsome. Another small hope. You pin a tiny sprig of lavender to the inside of your belt on days when talk with neighbors might be long. It makes patience smell like something you chose on purpose. You share this trick with hopeful you in a threshold whisper. They smile and admit to keeping a sprig of mint tucked near their collar on days when persuasion needs help. You resolve to appear at hard conversations smelling like a garden that knows how to be firm. Curious tidbit. The sister swears by bread omens, sprinkle a few crumbs on the sill and watch. If a wren appears first, good. If only sparrows, fine. If a crow, expect letters. If the cat, expect the cat. You conduct the experiment and receive, predictably, the cat. The cat is delighted by the success of folk ways and requests repeat trials. You tell him science demands variety and give him a second helping. Candlemas arrives with a procession of light, beeswax poured into cry-proof shapes. You bring your pair to be blessed with everyone else's. The priest's voice turns a roomful of quiet flames into one shared prayer. You don't believe the wax will pay rent. You do believe it will comfort you while you do. Mainstream historical fact. Candlemas marked the presentation in the temple and often involved blessing the year's household candles, domestic spirituality at its coziest, and sometimes weather lore. A bright Candlemas could portend more winter in some tellings. You prefer the lore that says light multiplies. You carry your pair home like small, brave torches. Rumor, which hates being left out of anything with snacks, pops up with a claim that knots tied on certain days can coax a beloved into extra haste. You decline the coercion category and employ the knot only for your own nerves. One knot for patience, one knot for listening, one knot for assuming good intent when fatigue makes everyone conversationally clumsy. Historians still argue whether love magic prosecutions mostly targeted women unfairly or actually policed broader anxieties about consent and control. The record is messy, but your conscience is. Your rituals must bless, not bind. You do allow yourself one little theatricality, baking fortune rolls with hollow spaces big enough to slip a strip of parchment inside. You and your aunt write the least controversial fortunes imaginable. Remember to nap, more stew, compliment the broom. You place them on plates after supper with hopeful use household and watch everyone laugh at the future, which is exactly the sort of power you want over it, laughter, not leverage. Mainstream historical fact. Charms and prayers often overlapped, invoking Saint Valentine in later centuries, Saint Agnes for dreams, Saint Joseph for work, local patrons for weather and windows. While parish life tried to fold the practices into fasting, almsgiving, and confession, rather than fight them. The priest, noting your tidy habits, suggests a joint alms on the week before the wedding. You and hopeful you bundle bread and coins and bring them to the poor box together, which is a better charm than any knot you'll ever tie. Joke 2, you whisper, I hope generosity is contagious. And the candle maker, passing like a benevolent wax ghost, says, I've seen worse epidemics. One evening, during a fog that makes the lane sound like a whispered book, you and hopeful you each place a shoe on the threshold from the inside, heel to heel, toe pointed outward, and step into them at the same time, one step, then back. It is a ridiculous, private rite no one else sees, and it makes you both grin like thieves of joy. You consider that a sacrament of the household you're building. Silly, shared, harmless, true. Historians still argue whether such micro-rituals ever made it into records. They rarely do, because no one thinks to write down small happiness, which is why you do it now in your wax tablet. Then erase it, because the memory stuck without ink. The days shrink tightly around last tasks. You bring the dowry chest to the door and practice lifting it as a unit, not because it's heavy, but because choreography matters when everyone expects you to look like a person who can move a life with grace. The sister arrives with onion tarts that smell like advice. Your aunt checks hinges like a bishop checks doctrine. You tie 2 green ribbons, one to your thread book, one to the chest key, and laugh at the consistency of your themes. Curious tidbit. A neighbor insists that if 2 people can shell peas together without losing count or patience, their household ledger will never lie. You test the maxim with hopeful you under the sister's gaze. You discover that being teased by an onion makes you both faster, and that peas make a cheerful percussion when they hit the bowl in time. You also discover that the cat cannot be trusted with legumes. Night before the wedding minus a small handful of sleeps, you choose not to stay up late making lists you will only complicate. You take the blessed beeswax, light it for a minute, and blow it out to test how the room looks by your future light. It looks like home pretending to be a painting, which is a compliment. You hang your kerchief with the tiny rosemary stitch where morning can see it. You put the pewter scallop on the shelf in case travel ever calls you to fetch new stories for the kitchen. You tuck the knot ribbon in the thread book, because promises live where needles do. Joke 3, you tell your aunt, if I add one more charm to this room, a saint will open a booth and start charging rent. And she answers, then he can help with sweeping, which is the last word on folk piety anyone needs. As you settle, you notice how these rituals have not changed the world and have changed you, making your patience visible to your own eyes, giving your hands jobs when waiting makes them fidget, tying your breath to saints and bread and neighbors, so your heart doesn't float alone. Mini thesis, final. Gentle traditions don't force fortune. They steady the people who will meet it, turning the long pause between banns and vows into a soft, shared practice of hope. You wake to a day made of errands and distances, the kind of day that smells like road dust even if you never leave town. Not every courtship gets to walk across a square. Sometimes it has to walk across counties with only letters, messengers, and borrowed saints for company. Yours may not need miles, but you can feel the world wanting to stretch, and you rehearse the art of being close from far away. Because closeness is a skill, not just a geography. Mini thesis line. Medieval long-distance courting survives on steady messages, trusted go-betweens, and shared rituals that let 2 people inhabit the same time even when they can't share the same street. The town's communications network is older than gossip and nearly as fast. You have options. A peddler who walks a loop with a pack that knows everybody's secrets. A pilgrim heading shrine-ward who carries more prayers than bread. A monastery porter who treats letters like quiet guests. A guild courier who believes speed is a sacrament. Mainstream historical fact. Messages commonly travel by hand, friends, clerics, merchants, and pilgrims, rather than formal post. Monasteries function as relay stations, and markets as switchboards where news hitches rides on carts. You build trust by feeding the feet that carry your words. Your first letter is not romantic. You write as if you're ordering salt, calm, legible, sturdy. On a wax tablet, you draft a version with lines that will survive a reading to someone's aunt. Work goes. The chest is ready. The elder grunted approval. Candlemas beeswax looks unusually hopeful this year. The tablet lets you edit without wasting parchment, which pleases both budget and conscience. When the words feel like a chair that can hold weight, you copy them onto good rag paper, fold with clean angles, and stitch the edge with a single green thread for patience. You avoid sealing with wax unless a monastic porter insists. Stitches are enough when you trust the hands that will carry it. You choose a peddler who has returned your aunt's buttons for years without stealing their stories. He tucks the note beneath his shirt with the sanctity usually applied to saints' bones. A curious tidbit. Some folks sent letters, lavender for I am calm, rosemary for remember, mint for wake up, smoke for my candle misbehaved. Scent travels badly through rain and better through memory. You breathe over your page with warm milk on your breath and decide that counts as home. The peddler leaves, promising return before the moon changes its mind, which is both poetic and meteorologically noncommittal. Days lengthen and then behave. You practice patience with tasks that create the illusion of control. You sort the thread box, you label the beeswax stubs, you polish the good spoon because hope likes mirrors. Joke 1. You tell the cat, we are performing remote courtship via organized drawers. And he, already inside the drawer, says, MRR, which translates to I am the post. The reply arrives as if it lived under your doorstep the whole time. Calm, legible, sturdy, smelling faintly of rosemary and rain. It reads like you write. Work reports, elder grunting range, candle moods, tiny promise about a window that looks at dawn like it owes you money. TH. Airs a line about the guild courier's schedule, in case the next note needs to outrun weather. Mainstream historical fact. Itineraries matter markets, saints, days, and guild meets create predictable routes and timetables for messengers, letting lovers piggyback on commercial rhythms. You add other people's calendars to your own. Courtship becomes a logistics minor. Distances aren't merely miles. Sometimes they're thresholds with inconvenient opening hours. You learn to keep the conversation going by objects that can travel without footnotes. A kerchief corner newly stitched with an extra rosemary sprig arrives tucked in the letter. You answer with a thread-card wound in green, patient as grazing. You enclose one of your ridiculous fortune rolls recipes, because nothing says, I am thinking of you, like a precise oven timeline. The sister, always the onion laureate, adds a postscript across the margin. Remember to breathe while reading. You obey, which is a useful skill in any century. Pilgrims become your favorite post. Unlike peddlers, they carry the kind of seriousness that makes letters behave themselves. You visit the church porch at Prime and find a group bound for a regional shrine, staffs, scallops, a dog that looks like it has opinions on theology. You ask if they will carry 2 small notes and perhaps mutter your names when they pass a candle. They nod with the humility of people who have traded soft beds for road dust. In return, you pack them a parcel: bread, a small jar of mint salve, and a blessing that trips on your tongue and lands standing. Historians still argue whether pilgrim networks functioned as reliable post or merely romantic legend. In practice, bodies in motion move messages if you feed them. You also explore the monastic option, the porter at the abbey gate, a man who knows every kind of door. He accepts letters for those known and keeps a slate of incoming names like a very quiet tavern sign. He promises to hand your folded words to the right household when they come for alms barley. You leave with the sense that stone has joined your mailing list. The porter slips a small psalm verse into your hand. He has put my tears in his bottle, which is both intense and a reminder to drink water. You do both. Curious tidbit: some couples plant messages, literally, in hollowed hedgerow posts or niches near wayside crosses, picked up at set times. It's the kind of code that works until a goat learns to read. You try it once with a token rather than words: a small wooden disc with your intersecting path pattern carved in, tucked behind a loose stone by the baker's back wall, retrieved at none. The stone seems pleased to help. The baker pretends not to notice anything except flour. Stone and flour are excellent co-conspirators. Your letters acquire a rhythm. Open with work bread. Move to mutual people, neighbors, elders, rumor temperature. Add a small charm report, lavender under belt, mint at collar. Conclude with a shared time marker. Light the candle at dusk when the bell has rung 3 times, so that in 2 houses, at the same minute, one small flame thinks it is living in one room with 2 corners. Mainstream historical fact: shared devotional practices, saying the same psalm at the same hour, create a sense of simultaneity across distances. Monastic hours become love letters drafted by bells. You find that breathing on the beat makes the waiting softer. Weather interferes. A rain eats a messenger's shoes, a thaw swallows a road, a fair abducts your peddler for 3 extra days. You practice the gospel of the second note. Send a shorter one ahead announcing that the longer one is wet, late, or stubborn. When you cannot send anything, you bake, because flour keeps hands from inventing tragedies. Joke 2. You explain to your aunt, I am kneading anxiety into metaphor, and she says, add salt, which actually helps both bread and nerves. The guild courier impresses you by treating your letter like invoice and prayer at once. He wraps it in oiled cloth against sky tantrums, and he writes a receipt on a sliver of wood he expects you to keep like a relic until he returns with the reply. You put it by the candlesticks because nothing pairs better than lumber and light. When he returns, he recites the delivery details with the precision of a witness. Who opened the door, which hand they used, where the cat sat, how many candles were lit, and whether the kitchen smelled like onions, mint, or future. It smelled like future. You wonder if the courier moonlights as a poet. Longer absences test your liturgy. A masterwork task or a distant audit drags your maybe person away for a fortnight. You enact the plan. A letter every 3rd day, even if banal. One shared psalm at Compline, light in darkness. A pinch of conversation entrusted to the sister via onion courier, and a boundary rule: no letter longer than it takes a candle stub to burn, to prevent epics that smother rather than warm. Hi. Historians still argue whether medieval epistolary styles for ordinary folk mirrored the courtly tradition, ardent, flowery, or stayed closer to lists and weather. Your letters tilt toward weather with the occasional poetic accident when sleep sneaks into the ink. You experiment with a small cipher not because secrecy is needed, but because play makes patience feel like adventure. Capitalize the first letters of each line to spell a word like sprout or steady. The sister discovers the game on her third read and returns your cleverness with onions, which earns her the right to edit any correspondence forever. You use the cipher for grocery lists too, placing a hidden broom in a paragraph about markets to remind someone to buy the tool destiny demands. Mainstream historical fact: literacy rates vary. Many people dictate letters to someone who can write, clerks, priests, friends, and rely on readers at the other end. Trusted intermediaries hold immense power. That your aunt can write, and you can write is a luxury you don't flaunt. When you must, you dictate to the priest in a tone that could be read aloud to a room without causing any fainting, which is the correct measure for dictated love. Not all messages are words. A parcel arrives, a loaf with a decorative scoring you recognize, the spiral you used months ago when you were still smuggling meaning past goats. The crust cracks exactly where it should. Inside, a small folded napkin carries a pattern you've both drawn, the intertwined paths. Under the napkin sits a single sugar almond, a Saint's Day indulgence saved for you. You split it with your aunt because generosity only counts when it spreads. You send back a jar of plum preserves labeled for finishing the distance, which is either culinary or prophetic. Rumor tries a new hobby, forecasting misery when letters are late. You counter with a ritual you invented last week, reading one old letter slowly by candle while drinking warm milk, then writing one new line on the wax tablet. Just one. That begins today I noticed. Add a detail. Geese practicing their honking, the way the market dog dreams with its paws, how the candle maker trims wicks like he's forgiving them. Details tether you to the same town, even when bodies move. Joke 3, you tell the sister, we now defeat anxiety with geese. And she says, finally, a use for geese. A friend returns from a small pilgrimage and hands you each a badge, a pewter heart pierced by a lily, local workshop's honest effort. You do not wear it on your sleeve. You pin it inside your chest metaphorically, and inside your kerchief literally. When letters miss their cue, you touch the metal and repeat to your ridiculous self, we have a plan. Plans are amulets you make yourself with paper and bread and calendars. Finally, distance shrinks. Footsteps you know from their decision-making pattern arrive at your door. Breath that once smelled like rosemary and rain smells like rosemary and travel. Laughter behaves as if no road had ever learned how to belong. You talk in ordinary sentences first. Did you eat? Did you sleep? How opinionated was the mud? Because bodies deserve courtesies before hearts rehearse their speeches. Then, in a doorway with the correct number of chaperones pretending to own onions, you summarize all your letters in a sentence with no ink. We kept time together, you say. We did, they answer. That's the whole point of long distance, making time a place two people can live in. Mainstream historical fact, gentle coda. When couples couldn't reunite quickly, war, plague restrictions, harvest demands, communities often sustained them with news chains, shared prayer hours, and practical help for those waiting. The network was never only two people. Your town has done its job. Peddlers, pilgrims, porters, couriers, sisters, aunts, priests, candle makers, geese. Historians still argue whether romance across miles was rarer or merely less recorded among ordinary folk. Your kitchen ledger suggests it happened whenever bread permitted and patience learned to write. You sleep with the wax tablet beside your bed, the last unfinished sentence smoothed away. There's nothing to write tonight because the author is home. Mini thesis, final. Distance doesn't starve love when you feed it routinely. Letters like bread, shared hours like candles, and the kind of community that treats two people's patience as a public good. You don't plan for trouble, but courtship in a town is a team sport, and every team has its fumbles. The Squares chorus can turn from lullaby to commentary in one market morning, and your tidy bands can suddenly look like scaffolding around a building that needs repairs. Rumors, missteps, and second chances arrive like uninvited weather. The skill is not pretending clouds don't exist, but learning how to walk under them without getting mean. Mini thesis line. When gossip or mistakes bruise a romance, medieval communities offer frameworks, public apology, penance, and witness, to mend trust without setting fire to the whole house. It starts with something simple enough to be complicated. A laugh too loud by the ribbon stall, a pause too long by the well, a conversation that looked like a confession, but was actually a debate about onions. A neighbor notices, as neighbors do, then repeats the noticing, as neighbors also do, and by none the noticing has picked up adjectives. You feel the room tilt. You've survived worse. Remember when a dog ate a love note and briefly became the town archivist. But this one brushes your band's week and doesn't care about calendars. Your aunt, veteran general of small wars, calls counsel at the table with the gravitas of a bishop and the briskness of a baker. We choose daylight, she says, and that is the whole strategy. Mainstream historical fact: medieval towns handle ordinary scandals with publicness, apologies in markets, reconciliations in front of doors, and the occasional appearance before manorial or church courts for penance, designed to restore rather than punish when possible. You prefer to fix everything with a pie, but the protocol is older than pastry. First move, the straight road. You walk to the household implicated in the rumor your hopeful use, which is also your own by intention, and you repeat, clearly and politely, what happened. A laugh, a pause, an onion debate, no confessions except culinary. You ask what they need to feel settled. A conversation with witnesses, a brief statement at the well, the return of a ribbon that acquired too much speculation. They ask for the market version of a press conference. You, hopeful you, sister, aunt, the rumor's original mouth, if it will come. And the candle maker, because nothing soothes crowds like a person who sells light. Curious tidbit: some parishes keep a pax board used in Mass for sharing the kiss of peace without lips, a little wooden plaque passed from hand to hand. Occasionally, communities redeploy the pax board outside church as a prop for reconciliation. Parties touch it in front of witnesses, sign of peace without relitigation. Your town isn't formal about it, but the idea hums. You choose the well as your spot. It has seen worse and forgives easily. The square collects like a friendly storm. You speak first, using the tone you practice when you want the cat to stop stealing peas. Calm, firm, generous. We laughed, we paused, we offended no one's bands, we love onions and propriety. The sister adds onion commentary that somehow functions as footnote and character witness. Hopeful you speaks in the same key. Their words and yours rhyme without rehearsing. The candle maker, bless him, lifts a stub and says, "Light burns better with trimmed wicks, gossip smokes when unattended," then offers the rumor's originator a way out. Perhaps you saw shadows that asked to be corrected. The originator, to their credit, accepts the lifeline. The square exhales with permission. Mainstream historical fact. Public words matter. Apologies and clarifications made before neighbors carry social teeth. People remember who chose generosity when they could have scored points. Historians still argue whether these communal reconciliations leaned toward controlling women more than men. The records tilt that way too often, and the sisters' raised eyebrow could indict a century. You hedge against that tilt by scripting the moment as shared responsibility and shared boundary. Both of you keep the same rules. Both of you name them out loud. Both of you refuse to make the other person the moral weather. Sometimes, though, the bruise is self-inflicted. Maybe you forgot the invisible curfew of talk, lingered in a doorway past the town's patience, or cracked a joke that read wrong 3 houses away. You feel it instantly. A cousin's greeting cools by 2 degrees. The baker forgets your usual. The priest's homily on temperate tongues feels tailor-made. You choose the older remedy, penance, not theatrical but practical. You go early to market. You buy bread for the poor. And you stand by the church door after Mass with the unglamorous humility of someone who knows that dignity grows faster in soil than on stages. Mainstream historical fact. Light public penances, alms, standing at the church door, processional participation, served to reset reputations and reconcile the penitent to the community with as little scarring as possible. A formal court might intercede for bigger messes, promises made and broken, fights that threw tools, words that damaged coin. You hope never to see the inside of the official room, but you prepare anyway because adulthood is a packing list. Witnesses lined, gifts, dates remembered, handfast wording documented in someone else's careful ear. You keep your wax tablet with lines like, "We promised before elder and light," in case future you needs a breadcrumb trail. Historians still argue whether courts tended to make couples marry to fix improprieties. The archives are full of nudges toward the altar, some wise, some clumsy. Your plan for avoiding clumsy nudges is to be boringly decent in public and interesting only in kitchens. A smaller storm brews the next week. Hopeful you's old friend returns from elsewhere and decides to perform nostalgia loudly by the gate. It's harmless. It looks less harmless through 4 windows and a rumor's telescope. You deploy the preemptive explanation, the most underrated tool in the kit. You introduce yourself to the returning friend with the clarity of a crier. "We are promised," you say, "and we like visitors who like thresholds." The friend bows to the sentence, admires your beeswax, praises your broom, and leaves the square with goodwill secured. Joke 1. You tell the sister afterward, "I just married a threshold," and she replies, "They keep you from falling," which is comfort disguised as architecture. Trust mending isn't just external. Sometimes it has a kitchen addition. You and hopeful you will misread each other. Everyone does in any century. The remedy is the oldest. Sit with bread, name the mistake, take turns being the one who chooses softness first. You practice sentences that begin with "when I saw" instead of "you always." And you apply rosemary liberally, because memory can be kinder when it smells like gardens. Mainstream historical fact. Domestic confession, private apologies, mutual prayer, sat alongside church confession. Households wrote their own liturgies of repair. The priest blesses that work from a distance. He does not need to supervise your soup. Curious tidbit. A few households in your town keep a sorry spoon. A wooden spoon with a notch burned into the handle. Whoever cooks with it first after an argument silently offers peace. It's ridiculous. It's brilliant. It relocates ego from mouth to hand. You carve a tiny star into your spoon and announce the tradition to your aunt and the sister, who adopt it with alarming enthusiasm. The cat, naturally, believes the spoon is a toy of reconciliation and chases it under the table, which counts as comic relief. Not all rumors deserve public theater. Some fray like twine if you just keep walking decently. You develop a standard 2-week response plan. Live visibly as your promises suggest. Escalate only if necessary. Refuse conversational bait that would let the rumor rewrite your script. The candlemaker calls it trim and carry on. The elder calls it shop open, mouth measured. Your aunt calls it Tuesday. When true wrong happens, say, a sharp word you didn't fetch back fast enough. You choose over correction rather than justification. You deliver the correction where the wrong was heard, not merely where it was spoken. If 5 neighbors watched your temper practice wrestling, 5 neighbors watch your kindness practice penance. Mainstream historical fact. Restitution had a public dimension, returning goods, apologizing in the same space, sometimes fines paid to the town. It taught the square to trust memory more than rumor. Historians still argue whether communities allowed second chances freely or hoarded them. The answer, predictably, depends on status, gender, and the saintliness of the elders in charge. Your square, on its best days, likes to forgive because forgiveness is cheaper than replacing neighbors. On its worst days, it needs a push. You sometimes ask the sister to be that push. Her onion cough can move mountains. Then comes the test you didn't schedule, a small accident. A ladder slips in your almost shop. The only thing injured is pride, but pride bleeds like drama. Passers-by help, because that is what towns do. You thank them loudly, because that is what reputations do. You catch your breath and see hopeful you handling the mess with competence and zero theatrics. Something inside you exhales in a new register. Trust isn't only about gossip. It's about watching someone make a bad moment smaller instead of bigger. Joke 2. You tell them later, you managed that with such calm the latter apologized. And they answer, we trained it during bands, which is exactly the sort of nonsense you want in a marriage. You decide to make a formal offering at church, not because you broke anything that needs absolving, but because gratitude wants to spend itself. A small loaf, a beeswax stub, and a coin folded into the poor box with the same care you use to store ribbon. The priest nods, the port. R smiles, the rumor yawns and moves on. Mainstream historical fact. Reconciliations sometimes culminated in shared meals. The Latin root of companion is with bread. You invite 2 households who overheard the worst part of the rumor to dinner. You feed them stew that forgives, bread that hears, and pears that try hard. You do not mention the rumor directly. You let the meal perform its own liturgy. When they leave, they take some of your story with them and retell it with different adjectives. Steady, decent, mildly funny, better at stew than at scandal. A final ripple tests your shared spine. Scheduling collides. Guild work threatens to crowd your wedding day window. Panic peeks in with muddy shoes. You apply the doctrine of choose boring. You move a thing, you inform witnesses. You repeat bans if needed so no legal hinge squeaks. Historians still argue whether bans needed rereading after schedule changes. The safest route is extra reading and extra bread. You choose safety, and the town applauds by immediately becoming distracted by someone else's goat. Joke 3. As you extinguish lamps the night after the well speech, you tell your aunt, "We staged a tiny play called We Are Fine," and she replies, "The critics were kind," then adds, softer, "because the cast was honest." You like her reviews best. You fall asleep with a sense of how resilient affection can be when everyone agrees to treat it like a public good rather than private spectacle. Mini thesis, final. Mistakes will happen. What matters is the choreography of repair, swift truth, visible kindness, and the grace to let a rumor die without needing to win an argument over its grave. You wake to a morning that behaves like a promise, cool light, bread quietly rising, wax waiting to be fire, and the square already half composed for your small, public sentence. Weddings in this town are not thunderclaps. They are steady rain after weeks of useful clouds. You move through the rooms as if the floorboards were old friends recruited into ceremony, touching the chest, the broom, the kerchief with the tiny rosemary stitch. The beeswax the candle maker trimmed as if each wick were a small sermon about steadiness. Mini thesis line. Partnership in this world begins where spectacle ends, at a door, with hands, before witnesses, and then at home with chores that choose to be tender. Your aunt ties your kerchief with the reverence normally reserved for relics and bread. She does not cry, but she does invent a new category of sigh that sounds like gratitude stretched over memory. The sister arrives in her best onion formal, linen neat, humor sharper than usual only because it is about to become kindness, and she inspects your hem with the concentration of a cathedral mason. "It will pass," she declares, which in your shared dialect means you look like a future. Mainstream historical fact. In many places, the joining begins at the church door, public, visible, face to face, then continues inside for mass and blessings, a choreography that keeps the community both witness and shelter. The bell calls the town like a mother who knows dinner is ready. You walk, not because the church is far, but because walking is part of the saying. Friends materialize in the lane in that accidental way villages and towns have perfected. The candle maker falls in step smelling like honey and truth. The elder offers a grunt that sounds suspiciously like a blessing. The door stands open like a patient jaw, and the priest waits with a book that once frightened you and now looks like a very organized cousin. At the threshold you stand together, palms ready, as if the last months had been a rehearsal for learning how to hold something without squeezing it. The priest speaks words everyone knows and nobody is bored by, because familiarity is oxygen when nerves prefer fireworks. You say, "I will," in a register you reserve for vows and cats. They answer with the same music. Hands meet, witnesses nod. The doorway absorbs your sentence into its wood, joining the archive of "We meant it" uttered here long before you were a thought and waiting to be said again, when you are candles, not people. Inside, the mass moves like water that has decided which stone to be laid beside. You offer bread and wine. You mean the bread and wine, but also stew and patience. You mean the candle, but also light when gossip wants to smoke. You mean the kiss of peace shared by board not mouth, because rituals prefer symbols that can survive Mondays. Historians still argue whether all ceremonies happened entirely inside later on, or began outside earlier. Your century enjoys the hinge, and you are grateful to know both sides of the door. Someone, probably the sister, weaponized awe, has placed a sprig of rosemary at the seat where you will kneel, because this story is determined to commit to its flavor profile. A child drops a sugar almond under your pew. You pick it up and pass it forward. The child, convinced. You performed a miracle, stares at you like a minor saint. It's not a bad misunderstanding. You will need occasional sainthood for sweeping without commentary. The leaving is gentle, a simple procession back into light that has agreed to be kind. The square behaves like an audience that paid attention. Old crank master bows at a distance and then ruins the moment by offering tool advice. You accept both bow and advice like someone who has decided to be generous first and correct later. The rumor, defanged weeks ago, applauds because it now prefers to be seen on the right side of history. Mainstream historical fact. Communities often expect a small alms at the door, a coin and a loaf to say, "We remember the poor," because private joy is safer when it invites public mercy. You give both gladly. Your purse is not heavy, but it has developed muscles. Then the part no ballad sings properly. The walk home with a broom in your future and a door that knows your laugh. A neighbor hangs a ribbon across the lane that you duck under together. Someone throws grain that pretends to be confetti and lands like hints of future bread. A child insists you parade your spoon, the sorry spoon, like a scepter. Joke 1, you oblige, declaring, "By the power vested in us by legumes, we pronounce dinner edible." And the square, which has earned a joke, laughs approvingly. Inside, your household is two households trying on one name for size. The chest sits where it will become furniture instead of story. The bed looks at you like a responsible conspirator. Yes to rest, yes to warmth, yes to breaths that believe in tomorrow, and no to a census of anything else because we are PG-13, and the cat disagrees with excess description. You light the beeswax. The flame stands up straight as if to be counted. You and your person perform the oldest rite of domesticity, placing things in drawers until they feel less like props and more like companions. Mainstream historical fact. Newlyweds often lived with kin or over workshops. Privacy was layered, not absolute, and intimacy learned to speak quietly while the town kept breathing outside. Your room's walls are good listeners. The threshold approves your soft voices. You devote the afternoon to founding acts. You sweep once together, both hands on the same broom like two sailors learning one oar. You set the ledger on the shelf where it will not be menacing. You hang the kerchief with its rosemary sprig in a spot where it can remind memory to be cheerful. Neighbors drift in with bread that pretends to be taxes and stories that pretend to be weather, but are really gentle inspections disguised as friendship. The weaver's niece presents a towel with edges whipped in the strongest stitch in town. The baker sends a loaf that has already decided to be your favorite. The candle maker brings a jar of wax ends with a note for mending light on sullen days. The elder offers a smaller, sweeter grunt and calls it sound. You, brimming with more gratitude than witty reply, invent a speech that lasts 2 sentences and ends with the word, often, which happens to be the perfect vow for dishes, kindness, and laughter. Curious tidbit. Some households mark the start of shared life by chalking the door lintel with a charm, letters, and numbers for a blessing, which will smudge and be renewed in quiet, forgiving cycles. The priest does this for you if you ask. Today you ask, The chalk sits on wood like frost that knows the year on a first-name basis. Chalk has been with you since pale faces in Section 1. It's nice to see it return as benediction instead of powder. Evening cooks itself with the help of everyone who couldn't resist sending ingredients. You stir, they chop. The aunt supervises without micromanaging, and the sister season checks with the gravitas of a bishop of time. You set the 3 rules of your table: eat slowly, speak kindly, and let the cat adjudicate ties, which is horrible governance and makes morale soar. Joke 2. You raise the sorry spoon and announce, "Let grudges flambe," and the sister coughs onion applause. After supper, when the hum lowers and neighbors peel away in pairs of contentment, you take a slow tour of your own rooms as if the corners were guests you'd better greet. This will be your mess and your museum. The broom leans like a staff of office. The ledger gleams like a dragon tamed. The bed breathes like a field after rain. You place the pewter scallop by the window, the rosemary beneath it, the knot ribbon in the thread box, keepsakes arranged not to impress visitors, but to steady mornings. Mainstream historical fact. Marriage gifts, saints, tokens, and craft tools mingle on the same shelves in inventories. You can tell what a life values by which items it puts under the same dust. Night quiets the square to a story you can hear without straining. The watch calls the hour, still performing their pastoral of curfew, and for once the word home means the same thing to your body and your heart. You remember every earlier scene: market glances, chaperoned loops, riddle cakes, guild ledgers, handfast hands, banns read aloud, candle flames agreeing to be brave, love charms that were actually chores, letters that kept time, rumors that learned to yawn, and now ribbon not as signal but as ribbon, doing the modest work of keeping cloth from forgetting its job. Historians still argue whether ordinary marriages were happy. Records overrepresent disasters, because disasters require ink. You, happily undocumented, plan to be as boringly happy as possible with occasional festivals of ridiculous joy. You will measure success not by troubadours, but by Tuesdays that behave and Thursdays that forgive. Tomorrow you will buy onions with the sister, counting it a sacrament. Tomorrow you will take your broom for a celebratory lap. Tomorrow you will begin the long project of making sure promises stay fed. Joke 3. As you bank the coals, you tell your aunt, "We did it. The world's most thrillingly uneventful wedding." And she answers, "May your days be exactly that dangerous." Then kisses your cheek with the speed of a rumor and the warmth of a well-kept loaf. The house hushes itself until even the candle decides to whisper, and you move through rooms that now feel like pages turned by a careful hand, each one softer than the last. You leave the broom leaning where it can listen to the night. You smooth the blanket once in the slow way that tells cloth to be kind. You set the small ledger closed as if closing it were a prayer. And you touch the rosemary, not to think of the past, but to invite memory to rest. Windows hold a little moon, and beyond them the square lies quiet, like a pond that has learned to keep secrets. The elm by the well does its patient breathing. The watch walks past like a lullaby that remembers its root. You take these last minutes gently, promising less and trusting more, letting the corners blur, letting the details soften, letting the day unspool into a few long threads that know exactly where to go. Breaths lengthen. The room stretches. The door you stood beneath earlier now feels wider and kinder and content to keep watch without asking for effort. Somewhere a neighbor's laughter fades into a drowsy hum. Somewhere a child rolls over and pulls the blanket higher. Somewhere the candle maker's shop smells faintly of honey and ash, and even that scent feels like sleep walking toward you. You lie down, not as a soldier ending a battle, but as a traveler arriving exactly on time, the mattress a road that understands arrival, the pillow learning your name again without hurry. The candle lowers itself until it is only an ember, a dot of daylight that refuses to be lonely, and the room becomes a small, safe harbor where vows are simply quiet promises washing back and forth across warm sand. There is nothing to chase now, nothing to fix, nothing to plan, just the low, kind rhythm of a house exhaling and the even kinder rhythm of two breaths finding the same pace. Let the square keep its own watch. Let the bells do their counting. Let the night carry you like a calm river, and let the morning find you rested, warmed, and very gently ready.